Well, we're into it now. That's going up the hill. I don't really need the truck just yet. I'm going to head down that way and kind of reshape all that to where I can back the truck down in and then start attacking that last set of spoils. I don't know, probably 200 yards. But I need to dig myself a pad to work from. So you'll see me kind of back down into the ditch and start working across to that spoils pile to the right of the camera. And then once I have a place to work, then I'll probably jump up on top of that and start loading out the truck. Well, I'm going to continue on building up 372s, or at least covering some of the assembly. And while I'm doing that, I'm sort of culling the junk pile, because after a few years you just collect a lot of junk. How many is that so far? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's probably about a year's worth, right? Pistons. Now I want you to look really carefully at these pistons. And I'm not going to say a thing. And see whether or not that one. See whether or not anyone spots kind of a funny anomaly that you usually don't see in original edition pistons. I'm not talking about the passages for, the straddle ports. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. But there's been a trend on pretty much all the ones I've taken apart. But I guess all of these are actually usable. I just have no use for them myself. And while I'm in here looking at top ends, I got one right here. This one here is an old XPW top end that has a gazillion hours. I mean, this thing was just run and run and run and run. When I got it, the saw was just completely whooped. But what I want to point out, and it might give you some explanation as to one of the reasons I do what I do with these, is basically I take these and just focus on increasing the compression, not really getting the revs out of it if I leave it stock. And part of the reason is, you see how that casting right there has got some material in the transfer port? It really takes down the cross-sectional area of the transfers. Interestingly enough, you have a little bit less cross-sectional area in the X-Torq. For that matter, you could probably say that with the addition of that material off there to the left, and then figuring in for the divider, they're probably very similar in terms of cross-sectional area. And of course, regardless of what the no-load spec is for a saw, I like to set my no-loads on both the XPW and the X-Torqs around 13, and then use a plug to figure out the rest. And one of the games you can play on the X-Torques is to help it flow a little better on the bottom end, is to flare or to radius the bottoms of the transfers. I did not do this cylinder. This is not one of my saws. It was a saw that came in from a customer who was a avid YouTube video fan, and they decided to do this, and actually didn't do that bad a job. And this actually was not a top end failure. After gutting the divider out of the filter holder and out of the intake manifold, a couple of things you can do is take some material right here and knife edge that to sort of favor that bottom passage versus the two top ones, and like he was attempting to do with this one here, radius the bottom of the transfers to help, you know, flow into the transfers. And he thought it was a good idea to adjust the port timing on the exhaust, because that's another one of the fads, raising the exhaust port. I have no idea how this saw ran, but with an XPW top end decked 20,000s with a squish of about 22,000s, he feels like that saw that he now has is stronger than the one he had before. So I have to take that at face value. I don't have experience enough with the before and after to tell you whether or not it was a big change, but he seems to think it was. But what's significant out of this is the saw is still out there making money. It's a logger saw. Now, here's another one that was smashed. Another interesting thing when you look at X-Torques versus original edition. Take a look at the transfer ports on the 50mm original edition versus the X-Torque, and also see how much smaller the transfer port is relative to the opening on the case. That's why the radiusing makes a little sense. Here's a set of cases, right? And the interesting thing is as much as I complain about an X-Torque stock, they're pretty much a match of a stock original edition. But with the caps and the other things you can do, a person who likes to grind and make chips out of aluminum just have a lot of things to play with on an X-Torque to make them run better. There's a lot to work with. So for the guy who's a journeyman porter, starting with an X-Torque is really not a bad deal. That's my point. But I'm going to retire all these top ends. But when I do get X-Torques, I like to keep the carburetor and the filter holder and the muffler. I definitely like to keep those, because when I blend the original edition top ends, I like using that carburetor, you know. I did a video on it, but to me, when you get an X-Torque that has a blown up bottom end, an aftermarket set of cases like this with an OEM crank, and one of the better top ends, whether it's an OEM 51.4 or a highway 52mm, you know, wrapping that with the rest of the saw that was an X-Torque to handle the plastic and all that stuff. For $150, $170, you've got yourself effectively a rebuilt saw that runs as good, if not better, than the original X-Torque, but I suspect will last as long, if not longer, as well. This is the 50mm OEM top end right here. That's the way the saw was designed to be. By the way, they put the 50 right on the top here. This is what the original engineers intended when they were building these saws. Okay? And a 50mm OEM original edition Husqvarna is a strong running saw. So what I decided to do is, on these aftermarket cases that have that broken section right there, right, with the worst OEM crank I could find, with the aftermarket bearings from China and the seals, right, it's all AM, I'm going to put this top end on it, which was decked, so it only has a 1/4 inch right here versus a normal 300 thousandths. It also has the squish band machine. So this was a hot rod cylinder, and they did not do anything to the roof of the transfer ports on this one right here. Okay, the transfers have not been modified. And what they had done was, this was a build that was done out west by Madsen's. They lowered the crown of the piston. Kind of what you do with a pop-up, right? Kind of a familiar theme. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take away the material that you see here with the marker. I'm going to go down 30 thousandths or so, and I'm going to blend it in towards the crown. That's what I'm going to do. And basically, this is an aftermarket piston, by the way. It's not even an OEM piston. And basically the game here is bringing the crown of the piston down, so now the top of the piston is close to being the same height as the floor of the transfer, and I've recovered the cross-sectional area lost where it was actually projected above the floor before. So by taking that material away, instead of opening up the top of the transfer, which is what most people do, I'm lowering the crown like you do with a pop-up, except for I'm going to do it with just a file. If it runs, it'll be fun, you know what I'm saying? The question is, it's going to run for how long? We don't know. But I guess the first thing I have to do, and this piston's been used, it's not the best piston, right? I'll make sure it's a true 50. It looks to me like it's a good fit, tight fit. But I'll take the rings out, and then I'll take the die grinder, and I'll take off some material and kind of rough it in. It won't be perfect. So basically what I'm going to do is I want to change the thickness of that from 130 to 90 thousandths. That's the game, okay, on both sides. Well, I stuck the piston in there, and I have a base gasket, and I'm going to check the squish. $20 thousandths would be nice, and that is exactly what we have with a base gasket in that particular cylinder. So I'm going to assemble this cylinder with a standard base gasket and my modified piston. But on this set of projects right here, I had the 562 Uncommon Surface Tool, and it really didn't show any problems. When I tried to pump up the primer bulb, it would not draw fuel. It just wouldn't draw any fuel, and I kind of traced it down to being something internal to the carburetor. I don't know what it is. It's got some kind of a severe air leak. And Bob basically said, yeah, you know something, better off just getting another carburetor versus trying to debug that one. So that one sits in the back burner until I get a different carburetor. Back to this one. This is going to be kind of like the ultimate trash build, I think. And where I've gone with this is I'm going to use this blocky, goofy handle. And I have a Madsen's top end that was a hot rod top end at one point in time, and I kind of die grinded in some eyebrows in the piston, pretty much the same as they had done. Took one of the aftermarket pistons I have and did that with it. And interestingly enough, when I tested the squish, came out exactly 20 thousandths. Without the chamfer, just something really has to give in order for the cases to go in. I mean, you can do it brute force like I just did, but One thing I do recommend is to put the wires on the switch before you put the tray in. Everything is wide open like that. I always put the ground one on the bottom. Yeah, and never forget the positioning pin down there before we get it in. The reason why you put a washer is because you want a more consistent bearing surface. So when you torque, you get a more consistent number. That is the theory. And yeah, I don't see this as the most accurate torque wrench in the world, but I go for 26 foot-pounds. Okay, continuing. Use a little bit of air to clean off this. Gotta tell you a little story about glasses. And had these little bumps above my eye. I'm not going to put the camera on there, just trust me, I did. And they looked like hairs, but they weren't. They were little pieces of metal. I was trying to think, what in heck's name could I do? Because I always make sure that I run the tools where the plane of spin is not faced at me. Thank God I had glasses on, because I had little pieces of this stuck in my eyebrow. And my wife found them. What are these things? She starts poking at them, and they're pieces of metal. Gaskets in there. Make sure that they capture those little pins, so the recess is up to capture the pins on those rings. And I like to put a little bit of oil on them before I put things together. Now I just put in the wrist pin clips. Video camera's off. I pulled this one out. I made some remark about wanting less tail on the wrist pin clip, and then took it out of the video because I didn't know if it was misconstrued. One of the things I try to do on the way down is get the pulse line through the manifold. It's a lot harder when the cylinder is all the way at the bottom. So we're not even getting anywhere near to full throttle on this thing. That ain't gonna work. It's raining out again. It's going to rain for the next couple of weeks, I guess. And I pulled my saws out of the truck. You know, I was going to hope to do some work on the saws and some work on the boats, but it was too wet. Okay, so now I have a filter holder. It's compromised. It won't grab onto the anti-vibe really well, but I think it'll do good enough for now, you know. And the other thing I need is a grommet for that. Okay. So I gutted that. You have to use the longer screws because the X-Torq carburetor and the filter holder demand it, just dimensionally require that. Don't forget the support ring that goes on the inside of that boot. Right? And I have got this loose because I'm going to set the carburetor on and then turn it to where I want it. That's probably tight enough. Okay. So there's a little bit of a twist in the carburetor to where it wants to be, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Once I've got that lined up to where I want it, now I can crank down on the boot, tighten it right up there. Okay, here's the pulse line. Need to cut just a little bit of the pulse line off. I think that'll work. One little anomaly you're going to see is it kind of pushes off to the side. That's because the grommet for the choke hits on this. This whole arrangement's a little bit longer than it's supposed to be. Alright, let me see if I can find a choke lever that will work on that. I think I need one of them little twisty blue ones. Yeah, see, this is the old style. This is what the new ones have. But remember, all this stuff would be on the X-Torq that you are trying to salvage, right? You shouldn't have to go dig into the junk pile like I'm doing. Okay, I have a functioning choke lever. That goes to full throttle. Remember, the reason why I pulled that handle off the saw that was on is because I couldn't get it to go back to idle. When I have that depressed, this depressed, it will not go back. See it? You got to release that in order to let it go back. So there's some kind of an interference inside here. Now I've already put in the sleeve and that little rubber seal in there is already inside. I did that, I don't know if I showed it on video, but I did. And you see this washer right here, which keeps the bar oil pump rotor from driving into the bearing. So at this point I might as well just put in the bar oil stuff. Got this. This came with the saw. This is Aftermarket. It's not Husqvarna. They leak because the molded rubber right here doesn't really seal good to the case. It's just not a very good quality part. So when this saw sits, it's just going to bleed bar oil out the bottom. There's not a thing you can do about it except for changing this out. Alright, let's see if we can't get this a little bit further along. And a couple things. First is I got to put that little grounding screw in. Second, I'm going to go and do the bar oil pump. If you look at that screw really closely, you'll see some red nylock in there. That is what came out of an OEM. You don't want to put them in too tight because there's not a lot of thread in the cases. And they also go all the way through to the case. So sometimes the guy put 1184 on them. This time I'm not. And like I said before, remember that little grommet. And this plate will eventually go on top. I kind of like to put a little grease in there. And that's the worm gear. It sets right down in there. Well, I'll put the clutch on for now, but at some point we've got to put the We've got to put up the chain brake parts. Alright, let's see if we can't get this thing stuck together. And these are all used parts. And this is pretty good. But some of the stuff in there I probably wouldn't use on an important saw. Like this cover is cracked. Stuff like that I probably wouldn't use. You know, but it'll work for this saw, for what it has to do. Alright, start with this. One thing is I kind of like to get grease also on these parts right here. Just a little bit of lube. First things first, the spring goes in. I just use a little screwdriver to sort of help that along. And set that in there. So really now the only thing I have to do is to load the spring, right? The thing is, once you load that spring, get that cover on real quick, because that gets to be a real pain if you don't. And I modified this by making that a lot thinner than it came stock. I'm going to go rattle that on a little bit. Slot captures the worm gear. You know you got it right when you can hear that clicking. I'm going to put a 7-tooth sprocket or 7-pin sprocket. You really don't need an 8 on a 372. You know, maybe a 390 has a torque to pull it, but you get the RPMs out of these, so the chain speeds up anyway. So I don't know if I really see the sense in, you know, trying to do. Alright, let me get the other side done. We got the flywheel on. Well, I've about run out of time on this saw. I have to go off and do some stuff, so I'm going to kind of rush through this just a little bit and maybe do a video someday in the future. I just use a hole saw, punch a hole in the corner, and I turn down on the lathe the tube. Basically I start out with some stuff like this and I just set it up on the lathe and then turn it down. And it's pretty much a match. Then use a pipe cutter to cut off a chunk. Not rocket science. I use brass, and the reason I use brass is because it's a little more resistant to vibration than a typical weld. Alright, I had to slam through this. We'll do the details after, but I ran out of oxygen, so this is going to be a little ugly for now. I like starting with the Hudzel mufflers because they're already gutted. And this is for a farm saw. Obviously, as I said in the past, if you're a pro, you got to have a spark arrestor, so this is not an acceptable solution. And I'm no longer a fan of these because the last couple of ones I've received, they've drilled further into there for some reason, and you can't get the full throttle with the aftermarket handle. So where I used to recommend these, I no longer do until they are corrected dimensionally, because right now they're not functional. Used to love these damn things. Really disappointed in that one. All I'm going to do here is just get the saw together to the point where it can run, and then we'll do the detail on a separate video, but I've just, like I said before, I've just run out of time. Alright, most important part of this whole thing is, will it run? Will it run? A little bit of bar oil. It's going to leak out anyway, so. See if it restarts. Yep, that's the video. That damn thing's gonna run good. You know, you get a feel from the way the throttle response is, and even with this goofy handle where I really can't snap it the way you're supposed to, and it's not even getting the full throttle. So we'll eventually detail out this saw, because really what we've been trying to test all along is the cases and stuff. Now I'm getting oil, you know, so it's pumping. I may have to adjust the pump to get a little more oil, but what do you think, guys? That is an absolute junk pile build. I mean, all that stuff on there, with the exception of the muffler and this and a few detail parts, are things I probably would not put on a normal saw. And like I said, we'll tune it up and detail it and solve its little issues in the next video. So, talk to you later. Bye for now. I gotta go take care of some boat issues.